A Bedtime Story by Kelsey McIntyre, read by Dana Rizzo. Once upon a time, the Goblin King grew tired of eating gnarled potatoes and beets in his dank, underground palace, and so he sent his goblin hunters out into the valley to search for something more delicate, such as children. 6 goblin hunters were chosen for this expedition, and they clustered around the craggy palace exit and waited until it grew dark outside. You see, goblins come in 2 shades: green, like the algae on the surface of stagnant ponds, or brown, like the rotting mud at the bottom. These colors would be advantageous if all goblins could swim well enough to hide themselves in ponds when they venture out from under the earth. But unlike the adept scavenging goblins, hunting goblins cannot swim, even slightly, and so must find other ways with which to remain unseen.
How will we know which houses have children?
The darkest brown goblin Nurgle asked. He had such a broad, flat face that his eyes were shaped like string beans instead of eggs.
Toith,
the leader Grimoss hissed. At their perplexed stares, he burst out,
Toith, you fool! Toith in the yards!
He means toys,
grunted a goblin named Mudge, short and fat as a tree stump.
Thank you, Mudge, but I can speak for myself,
Grimoss said, nevertheless breaking into a slimy green sweat and darting his bulbous eyes in all directions. When it was completely dark, they stole up into the valley and began to search the grass around each of the houses for basketballs, tricycles, teddy bears, fire trucks, or other signs of children within. Most of the goblins had reasonably good night vision, no worse than their day vision at least, but Nurgle's eyes were so narrow that he couldn't see much at all in the dark. So, while the others looked around for toys, he hummed raspily to himself and tried to avoid bumping too hard into benches and bird baths, and once, when he thought he heard Grimoss nearby, he bent over as if he were on the trail of some child-related object. At last, after some minutes of panting and shuffling, they found a doll-sized wagon on the porch of a little house on the edge of the lake that separated the valley from the snowy mountains. One of the goblins climbed on top of another to reach the doorknob, but his chortling stopped abruptly when he tried to turn it.
Locked. Of course it's locked. Bite the doorknob off,
Grimoss said, screwing up his fists impatiently. There was a pause, and then simply, and with a chomp and a dull clatter, the brass door handle fell to the ground. In scampered the goblins, leaving 6 pairs of muddy footprints from the welcome mat, up the staircase and on to the second-floor landing.
In here,
Grimoss whispered, pointing to a room with the door partway ajar and stuffed animals piled onto a wooden trunk at the end of the bed. Their breathing wheezy with excitement, the goblins filed in. Suddenly, light flooded the landing, and an enormous human, at least 6 feet tall, in flannel pajamas, emerged from one of the other rooms, headed for the staircase.
Quick, fellows! Hide!
Grimoss gasped. 3 of the goblins dove under the bed, and 3 jumped into the closet, including Mudge, who, in pulling the door shut behind him with more gusto than he had intended, accidentally made it slam so terribly that the noise rang throughout the house. The goblins froze. For a few seconds there was no response, and then the footsteps of the giant human began rapidly climbing back up the stairs. The goblins under the bed, including Nurgle and Grimoss, shrank back as the man's slippered feet appeared in the doorway and the light in the children's room flicked on.
What was that noise?
The human said, puzzled and groggy.
It came from the closet,
a girl's voice trembled.
The closet?
Yes,
squeaked a little boy's voice.
It was the monster.
"There's no monster in the closet," the man said. And the goblins huddled together even more as he padded closer and began tucking in the blankets around the children. "Did one of you fall out of bed?"
The closet door slammed and woke us up,"
the little boy whispered. Mudge felt two knobbly goblin elbows dig him in the ribs. Well, maybe you left it open last night and a draft blew it shut." The children thought about that possibility, and rustling sounds told the goblins that they were cuddling back down under their quilt. Just as the man was standing up to go, however, the girl said,
But can you check just to make sure?"
The goblins' hearts began to pound. "Of course," the man said with a smile in his voice. "Do you want me to check under the bed as well?" Nurgle's slitted eyes began to water, and he glanced at Grimoss, who was gulping and shiny with sweat.
"Yes, please,"
the little boy peeped.
Chief?
Nurgle breathed. Grimoss didn't answer. The man squatted and grasped the edge of the quilt nearest the floor to lift it up.
Chief? What's the plan?"
"Escape!"
Grimoss screeched. Goblins bounded out from under the bed and burst from the closet, their claws scrabbling on the wooden floorboards in their panic. The man reeled back as one of the goblins crashed into his legs, and the children shrieked and leapt up, their feet sinking into their pillows. But the goblins no longer bothered about stealth. Several tripped as they trampled down the stairs and ended by falling down most of the flight. They stampeded to the entryway, where so many wedged against the front door that it broke off its hinges and crashed out onto the porch.
"Home to safety!"
Grimoss yelled. They raced off between the houses and only slowed to an exhausted jog when they had reached the brushy outskirts of the now moonlit valley.
"What are we gonna tell the king?"
Mudge grunted, back to his usual sullen calm.
"That if he wants a delicate meal, he should try lettuce."
Used by We Are One Body Audio Theater, with the permission of the licensor, granted under a copyrighted license agreement. First published in Gilbert Magazine, a publication of the American Chesterton Society. A production of We Are One Body Audio Theater.